Good afternoon, good morning. Thank you, everybody who's joined us today. My name is Josh Slattery. I'm the Vice President of Tech Sales here at Vertosoft. Just wanted to kick this off with a few housekeeping items up front. This webinar is going to be recorded, so if you don't consent to being on a recorded webinar, please log off and we'll follow up with you individually, get you access to the content that we're discussing today. As questions do come up throughout the webinar, please type your questions in the Q&A box in the top right of your screen, and we'll answer questions at the end, assuming time permitting. If we are unable to answer any of your questions here, we will follow up individually to answer your direct questions after the webinar. And with that, once again, thank you everybody for joining us today. We do have a great discussion and presentation from the Zimperium team, highlighting the security threats to mobile devices using Microsoft Office 365 and how to defend against them. With that, I would like to introduce JT Keating, Senior Vice President of Product Strategy, and Kern Smith, the Vice President of Solution Engineering from Zimperium. With that, JT, Kern, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We are looking forward to having this conversation. There's a lot of things that have been occurring, obviously, in the pandemic world and all the rest of that fun stuff, with obviously Office 365 and Zero Trust and a few things along those lines that are at the top of the chart. So let's dive in. Kern and I love doing this, love having these conversations. This is my what I refer to as a BFO slide, blinding flash of the obvious, that overnight everything changed, right? And we know that. We went from largely all being in offices to largely all working remotely. So we're having to adjust and accommodate that new reality. There's Zimperium, we're in business to protect enterprises and government agencies in two primary ways. But we're in business to detect mobile attacks and mobile risks, and we do it in two ways: on the endpoints that the employees are using to access corporate enterprise, and then also within mobile apps that enterprises and government agencies are producing out to the end users. So every single day, we are protecting tens of millions of endpoints across major digital transformation initiatives. And you can see the list here, right, where we're talking about, remote working and BYOD, mobile apps, compliance, zero trust, et cetera. So every single day, we are protecting these. Today, we're really going to be zeroing in and focusing on a little bit of a combination of a few of these. I've put the box around O365, but it also bleeds to the left on both BYOD and remote working, because that's where people are and what devices are using. And it also blends down into the zero trust world. And I'll explain kind of how that all fits together here in a second. And then somebody that's way more savvy than me, my distinguished colleague Kern, will actually be showcasing this in a live demo. So I'm going to set the stage a little bit, and then he's going to bring it home. So why does mobile need protecting? Well, to start off with, 60% of the endpoints accessing an enterprise today are mobile, which means the traditional endpoint protection side of the world, which I come from, been 25 years in the EPP EDR space, endpoint protection, endpoint detection and response, covers 40%. So the bad guys know this. So another reason why it needs protecting is what's on there. And the average, you can see somewhere between 7 to 10, depending on which organizations we're dealing with, a minimum of 5 to 10 productivity apps are actually sitting on these devices, which means that data is exposed out into the world. Then we've got how many apps in general are on these mobile devices, and that's around 80. So you might say, well, why do we care? Well, what it means is you have, if we just go off the 5 to 10, somewhere between 70 to 75 apps that are on the devices that have ability to access your network and your information that you aren't responsible for. So what's in them? And as you might have seen a couple of weeks ago in Wired Magazine and a few other places, just as one example of security and privacy risks that are in the app sitting on your device, our Z-Labs researchers, who are really, really good, disclosed a vulnerability, or basically a configuration error in malicious apps that were accessing cloud-based storage, where that all the information in that cloud-based storage was wide open. So it's just an example of stuff you need to worry about. And then digital IDs, multi-factor authentication, things on those lines. Even if you're not using the 5 to 10 apps to access corporate resources, and of course we're going to talk about one, that being O365, or a series of them, I should say, you might be using the mobile devices as a digital ID for multi-factor authentication, zero trust, things on those lines. And again, the bad guys know this, right? So what are we protecting you from? Well, we all know about the attacker part. It's kind of obvious. We're also protecting you from your employees, because employees oftentimes don't really make the smartest decisions. We've always been, as security professionals, we've always been terrified by end users, right? They're the ones who make really bad decisions. Well, if we were terrified with them before, you should be even more terrified by them on mobile. Why am I saying that? Well, on mobile, users are the admin. There is no central patch management system. They're spending, even before the pandemic, the majority of their time outside of protected corporate networks. They're deciding what networks to connect to. They're deciding what apps to install, and then they're walking right back into your network. So we need to be able to identify attacks. We also need to be able to identify the additional risk exposures by not updating, by connecting to bad networks, by installing malicious apps or risky apps. Back on my 80 apps on the device side of things. We need to protect you from these guys, right? So what are the actual vectors that we need to worry about? Well, there's some time-tested security laws, one of which is persistence, right? For as long as bad guys have been going after any device, server, point of sale, anything, they want to be persistent for as long as humanly possible. Since all apps are in containers on mobile, the only way to truly be persistent is to truly compromise a device, to elevate privileges, to do something where you've broken out of you're sitting above the containers or below the containers, if you actually want to think of a container ship, and being able to access all apps and all resources, etc. So the end goal on mobile is to compromise the device. The other three are vectors to get there. Of course, there's malicious apps. Everybody always talks about malicious apps. Malicious apps on mobile are interesting from an enterprise security standpoint, but they're not really the most important thing. Why do I say that? Well, the vast majority of malicious apps that we see in mobile are consumer fraud. That's what they're designed for. Why? Well, because apps are in containers. Apps can deliver something that can compromise a device, but if I'm a bad guy and if I'm targeting an agency of the U.S. government, for instance, let's just call it XYZ agency so I don't pick on anybody, right? Still a three-letter acronym. That counts. So if we're going after XYZ, if I'm a bad guy, I'm not going to drop an app into the App Store or Google Play and pray that somebody from the XYZ agency downloads it. It's a bad business model, right? I'm going to use one of the other two vectors, which were much more focused and much more targeted. Phishing. 90% of breaches start with phishing. 2/3 of corporate email, or in this case, agency email, is read on mobile. All the traditional anti-phishing solutions are in line, the majority of them are in line in corporate email. While on mobile, you got additional vectors. You got SMS, you got Messenger, you got personal email. All of those can lead to being able to deliver an exploit that can end up compromising a device. And then there's malicious networks. The dumbest thing about smartphones is the phone introduces itself to the network, not the other way around. So your phone has this list of all the different networks that it's played with in the past. When it meets a new Wi-Fi network, it goes, hey, are you Starbucks? And it's like, no, I'm not. Oh, are you Marriott? All the network has to do is say yes. And if the network says yes, then the phone connects. So we are in business to protect agencies. We're in business to protect enterprises. We're not in business to protect consumers against fraud. So what we said from the very beginning of this whole thing was, as the guys that are protecting enterprises, we need to account for these things differently. So because mobile is different than traditional endpoints, apps are in containers, and the operating system is completely locked down, Gartner has defined this as a totally different space than the traditional EPP EDR. But if you're familiar with EPP EDR, all of the all of the different players that are in that, whether it's Carbon Black or Cylance or CrowdStrike, Microsoft Defender, all of those guys, SentinelOne, we are the equivalent. Mobile threat defense provides the equivalent kind of side of things, but that accounts for the reality of mobile devices in terms of what you need to deal with. So when we talk about zero trust, and I'm going to finish up here and we're going to go to Kern because O365 fits into this category. So when you've got Office 365, you have this business productivity suite that you are enabling on mobile. Broadly defined, there's two different types of devices, right? And no, yes, there's iOS and Android, but I'm going a different way. There's managed devices, those that you're managing with an MDM, which is part of the unified endpoint management, offerings. Again, this is Microsoft Intune, Workspace ONE, Mobile Iron, those guys, right? Managed devices, and then there's BYOD. And especially in this pandemic world, and especially in this world where you're trying to figure out how do I enable access to the resources that my employees need uniquely. So on Office, you can have Office 365 on a corporate managed device, and there's certain approaches. But the one we're going to show you today, which is a variation of zero trust, what Microsoft calls conditional access, is let's assume it's BYOD. And so let's assume that I'm providing access to Outlook and Teams at a minimum, plus some of the others. What do we do, right? Well, what zero trust and conditional access is all about, and using O365 as our example, is we need to assess the user. What do we know about the user? What's happening with the user, et cetera? But then also, what is the state of the device? Based on information from both of those, an enforcement point will actually give a go, no go, or what kind of level of resources am I going to give you, and that's what you do. So when we talk about mobile device security, right, I'm not going to go into it, way too many words, but especially since we're talking to a lot of government folks here, federal government folks, you should really check out the latest NIST publication that we actually helped work on with some other great companies. And it really talks about the BYOD framework and architecture and everything on those lines. So finishing it up and then handing it over to Kern. This is not designed to be a product presentation, but it helps frame up what you're about to see with Kern. I mentioned that we protect enterprises and agencies in two places, on endpoints and in apps. The endpoint solution for us is called ZIPS. That stands for Z Intrusion Prevention System, if anybody cares about the trivia. And what it does is it does machine learning-based detection on device of device, network, app, and phishing. Now, why am I saying on device? Why does that matter? Well, if you go back to our point about the four major attack vectors, if the bad guy owns the network, which is the most efficient way of targeting an agency, putting up a fake Wi-Fi network right across from XYZ's location, right? The bad guy owns the network. And so if the bad guy owns the network, putting your detection mechanisms up in the cloud, the first thing he does is cut off cloud-based detection. So if you're doing cloud-based detection on mobile, you're susceptible to have all of your protection cut off. We do all of our detection on device. And as a result of doing all our detection on device, not only can we survive when the bad guy owns the network, we're the most privacy protecting for BYOD, because we don't have to take any data off the device if we don't want to. And you can operate our management console in any cloud, In this case, for instance, including Azure, the folks that are doing cloud-based detection are all locked into one, which is AWS. This is what we do. Now, what we're going to do is, with our ability to actively detect these threats on device, Kern is now going to come in and he's going to show you an example of the zero trust conditional access specifically in and around O365. So Kern, do you want to take it from here?
Absolutely. Thanks, JT. So let me share my screen. Make sure I select the right screen. So a few different things that we have going on here. The first one is to leverage the existing deployment of Microsoft Endpoint Manager to start enforcing different things around either conditional access policies or app protection policies. And essentially the way that this works is through joint development efforts between Zimperium and Microsoft. We can integrate with Microsoft Endpoint Manager, and on the Endpoint Manager system, a few things can be set, be it a app protection policy that requires the device to be at or below a certain threat level state, and the presence of zips as an MTD to be on the device. And from there, enforcement can take place on both using the MDM controls, but also the MAM controls for those devices. Secondarily, part of our integration within the larger Microsoft stack is also to enable visibility across all endpoints. So this is where integrations with things like Defender or Sentinel become critical to be able to give organizations a larger view into what's going on all of those endpoints. So in this specific scenario, what we have is somebody trying to deploy or access Outlook or some part of the Office 365 stack. Now, in this scenario, as a corporate policy, we've enabled an app protection policy to say, hey, if you want to access Outlook, Teams, SharePoint, any number of the O365 apps, you must have zips on the device. So seamlessly, the user is told to get zips onto the device so that we can now ascertain the risk posture of said device. So what happens is the activation takes place, no different than any other app that's being enabled using O365. We'll leverage Authenticator for the authentication. And after the activation takes place, Zips is going to ascertain what the risk level of the device is. In this case, we see the device is reasonably safe, no high risk elements. So at this point, the user can go back to Outlook, will recheck the access, and they're off on their merry way while Zips is running in the background to continuously ascertain if that device should still be trusted or not. Continuous zero trust capabilities. So if, for example, an attack takes place, we can now then leverage automatic policies to automatically remediate or prevent potential exposure of data. So in this case, the user goes and says, hey, I want to connect to Union Station free Wi-Fi. Unbeknownst to them, it's a rogue access point. And we see Zips picks up on the fact that the device is actually a rogue Wi-Fi network that's trying to spoof that Union Station free Wi-Fi. By policy, we can then tell Microsoft to say, hey, this device is connected over a bad network or there's an elevated level of risk. We are going to block the access of those applications using app protection policies or conditional launch, conditional access controls, whatever makes sense based off of if the device is MAM or MDM. And then once the threat gets remediated, either automatically or by the user going and getting off of that Wi-Fi network, we can now then allow the user and the device to go on their merry way because the threat no longer exists and the device is now safe. So zero trust so we're able to integrate with that with zero trust and securely enable these devices out in the field. Now, once all of that takes place, we're also, as I alluded to earlier, able to integrate with other portions of the Microsoft stack, such as Sentinel, to provide visibility into what's taking place on those mobile endpoints and feed it into a larger XDR, EDR strategy across both device, network, application, and phishing threat vectors, while providing a seamless view of these risk components and being able to do the enforcement of zero trust policy on device, leveraging all the different integrations and controls that we've mutually worked together on. So JT, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Kern. Let's see if we can get back to the slides, which I think we're pretty close on. There we go. Perfect. Yeah. So Kern, that was perfect, and just kind of showing this whole side of things, and driving the zero trust conditional access side of things, as we talked about, it is in fact all about zero trust. Our recommended next steps is if you are in fact going after Office 365, whether it's on managed or BYOD devices, that you would engage with us. We can set up a pilot, show it to you guys how simple and easy it is along the lines of what Kern was just discussing, and we can help you guys protect those devices. And so with that, I think we're done with the formal part of the presentation. We always like to try and keep it to about 20, 25 minutes worth of content and see whether or not we have any questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the question capability section. Kern, any additional kind of last thoughts or any kind of things while we're waiting to see if we have any questions come up that you feel should be hit?
Yeah, no, I think it's, to distill it down, it's about how do you securely enable a workforce, right? And with mobile, it's a bit perverse in that mobile kind of has zero trust a little backwards. Trust is almost granted by default without having the ability, without really any type of continuous evaluation. And when you talk about, enabling remote workforces and just the different threats or risk vectors that these mobile devices are being exposed to, what we're finding is that the type of visibility and importantly, the automation that we can bring with the integrations with the Office 365 and the larger Microsoft stack really allows our customers to seamlessly and securely enable their employees without having to put additional load or additional management that's more about prevention. By having Zips integrated as part of this, we're able to do a continuous validation of if that device should still be trusted or not without impacting the user in any type of onerous ways, thus allowing better business outcomes and really driving that secure enablement portion of the business.
Yeah, I completely agree. Completely agree. All right. Well, I see that we don't have any questions, and we're not the type to usually just create questions for fun. We like to give people their time back. So with that, Kern, I'd really like to thank you for joining me on this, and thank everybody else for giving us your time. And Vertosoft, thank you for hosting this. And we will turn it back over to the folks from Vertosoft if they want to have any other last comments or if they want to wrap us up.
Yep, JT, Kern, thanks again for your time. We didn't have any last minute questions, so I think we're good here. Thank you everybody for joining us this morning, this afternoon. We'll be sure to follow up with everybody individually with the recording and answer any questions that may come up between now and then. With that, thank you everybody for joining us again. Have a great rest of your day and look forward to working together in the future.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Take care.